the Mark VI.
Here we go. I want to hear all about it.
I am not a vintage expert, for the record. There are people that like know everything there's to know about Selmer serial numbers and like when they changed this and what famous musician played that serial number range, all of that.
Sure.
But I believe that it is largely folklore, really, and just I don't know. It's just this like legendary thing that has happened. In my experience, again, I don't play a lot of jazz, and when I do, it's on a modern horn. You know.
Sure.
There's just, for me, what it boils down to is there's just like a wild amount of variety between all vintage horns, regardless of serial number.
Yeah.
And something that I love to argue with people about is like re-lacquered vintage horns versus not, which is like a huge selling point. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, horns that have been re-lacquered have a massive dip in value. And what we're talking about is back in the day, it was common for you play your horn for a year or two or three or whatever, and it gets, you know, a little worn and dirty, and you send it back to Selmer, and they took the whole thing apart. They stripped all the lacquer off of it. They buffed it back until it was shiny again, re-lacquered it, put all new pads and stuff. So when they sent it back to you, it essentially looked as good as it did the day it left the line in the first place. But the thing that I found is I've played plenty of re-lacquered horns that I repair first, and they sound fantastic, and they play great. And there are plenty of like all original horns that don't play that great. Like
right.
it doesn't seem like there's, to me, it doesn't seem like there's any super specific relationship. And the real issue, in my opinion, with re-lacquered horns is during that buffing process, mechanical stuff gets ruined from brass being removed, which lead to issues. It's not so much just the simple fact that it is re-lacquered, but it's kind of negative effects that happen that I think can be fixed by a repair person. I just spent a whole lot of time rebuilding a vintage super balanced action tenor for a customer here that I believe was made in 1950. And it was a horn that was previously re-lacquered and then stripped of all of its new lacquer. So it's kind of just a bare brass horn at this point. And it had all the standard mechanical issues, and it wasn't playing well at all. And now, I mean, and after like 30 or so hours rebuilding it from the ground up, it's a fantastic playing horn, and it feels as good as something that's brand new off the line. So, you know, there's all of this talk about Selmer or Mark VI's and like the length and shape of the bottom bow, whether it's like taller on this side or taller on this side. The U shape at the bottom of the horn. There's like the deep bow, the shallow bow. I don't know. There's people that claim all kinds of acoustical benefits from it. And you know, people that claim like, oh, in this serial number range, like this note is always flat. And I personally haven't seen, again, like I haven't done like a deep dive into the serial numbers of Mark VI, but in my experience, and I've repaired a lot of them. I've repaired, you know, 5-digit Mark VI's. You know, the first Mark VI serial number was in the 50,000s. I can't remember exactly what it was. There was a cool poster at Meridian Winds that had an ad from a magazine from Selmer that essentially said, if your Selmer saxophone is before this serial number, you're missing out. Like, you got to try the new one.
Gotcha.
So there's the referred to as the 5-digit Mark VI, which is just, you know, anything between that 50,000 and 99,999.
Right.
And there's immediately like, oh my God, it's a 5-digit Mark VI. Like, it has to be amazing.
Right. It's the one.
I've repaired plenty of those that are great.
Yeah.
And I've repaired plenty. I'm pretty sure they went into the 200,000s before they started making Mark VIIs and so on. And I've played, and like the newer it is, the worse it is inherently. That's the theory. And like, oh my God, if it has a high F sharp key, don't even talk to me. I haven't seen the evidence that suggests that is inherently true, regardless of anything else. The thing with those horns is Selmer was constantly changing stuff throughout the history of the Mark VI and not necessarily telling anybody or calling it something different. It was the Mark VI. So there's all this. The jazz players that we look up to were playing these horns. So now that's what people want to play because, well, that's what Coltrane played or whatever. I'm not going to try and list performers who used specific horns because I don't know. But then what I do know is like Bird, Charlie Parker, was playing like a different saxophone every gig.
Yeah, selling them.
And
all for
unfortunately,
crack.
yeah, exactly. He would sell it for drugs.
Yeah.
And then so whatever he could get his hands on.
Right.
So, I kind of think that maybe we should, I don't want to say we should have a Bird mentality.
Sell all our instruments for drugs. No, I'm just kidding.
Sell it for drugs and then just get something else.
Yeah.
But he sounded, again, I don't want to say he sounded great all the time because there are plenty of records where it's like, you can kind of tell he didn't get his fix and the ideas aren't coming out.
Right.
But he sounded like Bird every time.
Yeah. No matter what he's playing on.
Yeah. So, but again, at the same time, what my initial point was going to be like, oh, he was playing on a Mark VI. Well, yeah, because that's what there was at the time.
Right.
They didn't have, these other horns. And I'm not saying we should be playing jazz on a Series 3 either. Mm-hmm. But I'm just saying that's, I think, something to consider. Like, well, yeah, they were playing on it because that's what there was at the time. Maybe they would have preferred a Series 2 now. I don't know.
Right.
And there's again, the sound difference between a Mark VI and a Series 2 or 3 is massive.
Yeah.
I mean, you play these vintage horns and they just like scream under your fingers. Like you can feel them resonate. Mm-hmm. And that's where people like to tell you that the brass came from shell casings from the war, recycled brass, and that's why it sounds different and you can never reproduce that. There's clearly no evidence to support that.
Sure.
We know that so many factories and things were converted to making war materials, whether it be ammunition casing or weapons or whatever. So like, sure, there might have been some crossover in like literally in the factories, but again, there's no way to know that. In summary, I think it's just a toss up with vintage horns, especially considering the Mark VI. I think it's just a toss up, and there are good ones that shouldn't be good, and there are bad ones that were supposed to be good based on the serial number.